In the previous lesson, we created a rendering using the technique of the image-based lighting, or IBL, using an environment. And also we activated some extra effects to have a nice look for the shadow. And also we applied some post-production effects. We started to work with the cameras, with some of the render settings, and with the render view, the REDSHIFT render view here in Cinema 4D. So we started to go in the part dedicated to the renderings. In this video, we're gonna concentrate on this. I'm gonna discover more tools and features and parameters to manage the rendering. And we're gonna go from like a simple, quick setup like this into a little bit more complex setup, which is for like interiors. And we're gonna talk about the global illumination, the denoiser, the noise that it generates from the calculation, and so how to address that noise with the sampling and the denoiser and other tools. Also, we're gonna talk about the depth of field, which is perhaps also in this render, but it's not really visible. So we're gonna do a clear example of that. So if I want to have a better render, probably I need to use the render viewer here and also the bucket mode, which we are in right now. Now we are in regular mode. If we go into clay mode, we're still gonna be in the bucket, but that's gonna be quicker, and it's also gonna show us how the illumination works, the lighting in this scene. So we can concentrate on how the lighting is behaving without paying attention to the materials and all that part. So this is really important. It's really useful when you need to test lighting and illumination. And then you have the samples mode, which is the third of that little circles. And that's going to show you the samples of the global illumination, which is a combination of direct lighting and indirect lighting. And for that, we cannot use the interactive rendering. It's not going to show. So when we go into samples mode here in the render view, we will see that it's going to automatically switch to the bucket. And let me show you that a little bit better. Now, of course, the interactive rendering is pretty good when you're working in the 3D scene and you want to manipulate your scene. But the bucket mode, I think it's more accurate than the interactive. So I would go with the final render, I would use the bucket rather than the interactive. And also bucket mode, again, if we switch into samples mode, is going to show us the samples of the global illumination. So sampling means that the render engine is going to shoot photons, is going to discover what's in the scene, and is going to come back to the camera with the information of the lighting together with materials and all the rest that is in the scene. That's, roughly how the overall render process works. So it's based on the lighting. Lighting is the most important thing, of course, like in real life, also in the render. So we can work interactively using the interactive render, and then when we want to have more accurate results, when we want to do some tasks here in the sampling, we can switch into the render view and the bucket mode. And here also we have the settings on the right side for additional things that we're going to see later, like post-production effects. Some of those we saw through the camera, but we can also access from there. And here I can make it 100%, which means this is the full resolution of the image. Now, another thing that is good in the render view rather than the interactive rendering in the viewport is that we can take notes about the render and how much time it takes to generate the image. And we can save snapshots, so we can compare different situations working with the lighting, the environment, the materials, and so on. So we already talked about all these buttons here at the beginning of the course in the render view, how we can change and see the different channels, and how we can, for example, pick a focus, an object, a material, and then we have here like snapshots. So you can open up the snapshots panel, just click on the plus and create a snapshot, and automatically opening the snapshots panel right there at the bottom. And once you select one image, you can see again the results, the data, the information on the right, on the bottom right. And also you can open it up in the picture viewer if you want and copy it in the frame buffer. And So let's try to do something here. Let's try to deactivate the lighting, which is pretty simple here. We only use a dome light for image-based lighting and the sun infinite light or the infinite light for the direct lighting and the shadows. So if I turn those off and go back here, see what happens when I do the samples rendering. The lighting is almost absent except for some really small areas. So that's a pretty quick explanation of how the samples work. So if you don't have lights, you don't have samples. If you don't have samples, you have less accurate rendering, less accurate global illumination. So you can compare the two, but this is pretty visible. But just to say that, there is something that you want to compare, if you right click on a snapshot down there, you can set one to the A and then right click, set another one to B, and then you have this little line in the middle that will let you compare the two images. So again, that you can run some tests and you can see which one is faster, which one is better. You can also click on here and change the opacity of that, so you can compare it directly in there, or you can rotate this line to make this comparison line vertical or horizontal or oblique. And when you finish, you just right click and remove the B, or you can just remove everything. You can remove the entire snapshot if you want. So you can add others. So you can delete, you can remove, and so on. And let me just remove this. So now we don't have any snapshot left. Check also the timing. You can see the timing in there. So you can see that this is way more, well, it's faster than the other one because we have less lights, less calculation for the render engine. Well, we can say the render engines because there are two engines, a primary engine and a secondary engine. Now, if I go back here to the beauty render, which is going to show me everything, so that the standard one, well, you can definitely see that the lighting is not great. We don't have any environment, we don't have dome light, we don't have the sunlight or the infinite light, so it's pretty flat. Now for this lesson, I've used this model from Sketchfab, which you can get, and in this video I'm going to go back to the tiny floating home to do some interiors renderings. And again, you find all the information here and in the previous lessons where we use this. Now, before we continue, let's check a little bit the global illumination, how it works. So usually it works with two different types of lighting, which is the direct and indirect. Now, if you search for in Google, you'll find a lot of really simple images here to understand, which gonna show you how it works. But essentially, how it works is that your camera will receive some information that will come from the lighting, will return to the camera, and this lighting it's either directly hitting a surface or it's going to bounce on that surface into the scene and hit other surfaces. So when it hits directly, that means that it's direct illumination. When an object is enlightened by the bouncing of the light, that means it's indirect or secondary. We can also call this primary and secondary. So there's a rough representation of how it's going to work. So the light emits the photons or shoot the photons into the scene, and then the photons hit the first surface, and that surface is going to be revealed, and then it's going to bounce, it's going to take the colors with it, and it's going to hit other surfaces, and those other objects will be revealed as well. You can see here that the sphere is not directly illuminated, but it's indirectly lighted up by the scene. So that's the direct light in green, and then you have like indirect other bounces, other rays bouncing all over. So the more bounces you have, the more depth you have, the more quality. Now, if we go into render settings in Redshift for Cinema 4D, we know that we find everything in here in the render settings. We already saw this. And first of all, we can change the output resolution. So this is where you can actually create a bigger image, which means more pixels, which means more calculation for the sampling or the photons, because the sampling goes into the pixels basically. And here in the Redshift, you have basic and advanced, and then you have the global illumination right here. Now we're using the production, and then you have real time. And if we switch to advanced, we have a lot of more options here, and settings to do, but there is one tab called